Welcome back to Double Sleeved MTG. I'm joined with one of the finalists from the recent CCS tournament, and he has a very interesting deck that he'd like to share with us today. Introduce yourself, Malik.
Hi guys, name's Malik. I am a tournament grinder here in the North Carolina area. I travel a lot between, I guess, Georgia, Virginia, probably the biggest areas. Was in the Invitational in Nashville this year, and going to the Open in Pittsburgh this year as
Yep.
well.
Actually,
Um,
that's a nice segue. Want to be part of Magic the Gathering history? Then you need to come to the Steel City Spectacular from August 14th to the 17th. The wonderful folks from Excalibur Events has organized the largest CEDH tournament to date. It boasts $20,000 worth of prizes. Not a fan of Commander? Don't worry. There will be major events for the many other Magic the Gathering formats with awesome prizes like a Black Lotus. Also, the whole double-sleeved MTG crew will be there as featured guests, so make sure you come and say hi. Reserve your ticket today, and we'll see you there. Hey Malik, do you want to tell us while we're here?
yes, just finished in fourth place at the 10K at CCS this past weekend, playing Kefka of all things.
Do you want to kind of tell us about this tournament and how it kind of went for you before we get into the deck tech?
Sure. So overall, the tournament was a pretty good experience. Um, Pretty interesting story. I actually went 0 and 2 in the first two rounds. Some pretty rough games with just odd matchups, and seat order was just not my friend in game one. First game I was seat four behind three pretty grindy decks. Was met by double smothering tithe in game one. Uh, so that was fun. I think TNT jammed turn two smothering tithe. Glarb
Wow.
copied it on turn three, right behind them. So that was it was a rough game.
Please don't feed the smothering tides.
At that point, nobody cared.
Nobody
The
did.
the hilarious part of that game is that nobody was drawing cards to trigger the tithe, um, other than maybe the TNT, who of course doesn't care because they've got a tithe. That game was also met by double culling ritual. So it was rough. And then game two was pretty hard fought. There was a win attempt on the stack above another win attempt. The player trying to win on top didn't get there. And then we went into a final fortune turn, and that player ended up getting there. That game was a little frustrating in particular, because of one of my least favorite things about CDH right now, which is just the constant conversation around draws and game actions rather than people actually taking game
Yeah.
actions. And I think that if the players had focused a little bit more on the actual game instead of talking about it, I think that the results would have been a little different.
Yeah.
Either the player that was winning, attempting to win on top. I don't think it was my game either way. Unfortunately, between the two players that were attempting to win.
Yeah.
So I think it was a lose-lose situation for me. But taking myself out of that equation, I think it was one of those things where the player that was attempting to win on top of the stack either could have won the game or drawn it there, had we not spent so much time about talking about IDing rather than just taking game action. So that was a little
Yeah.
frustrating walking away from at the start of my day.
When I'm in a tournament situation, I try my hardest not to push for a draw. Anyway, that's beside the point. Um, I do want to focus on the exciting fact that Kefka made top four here, and another thing that I pointed out to you before we started this video was there is no blue farms in the top 16. No
Nope.
blue farm made top 16, which is wild compared to how everybody talks about how Blue Farm is a problematic deck in the format, and everybody's like Timna's this, Timna that. I mean, you see some Timna Dargos, but I mean Rog Thras seems like it's taking over the top 16.
Yeah,
Um,
there was a lot of Thrasios getting played. Funny enough about the blue farm, so that game two was the deck attempting to win on top was a blue farm.
hmm.
My game five was also triple blue farm. Um,
So that's why they didn't make top 16. You hit three of them all at once.
that fifth game. So for talking about the record in the tournament, I lost the first two games. Did end up on a clean sweep all the way up to top four after that. But that fifth Swiss game was against three blue farms. That game was more or less handed to me. But that is a story for a different time.
Well, let's well, leading into this deck tech, I know everybody's like, please give the deck tech. We want to hear about it. But I think there is something to say, like, how did the deck performing? You're talking about your record. Um, let's start talking about kind of your finals matches. How did Kefka perform going into this final four, as far as your last two games in the top 16?
So top 16, I feel Kefka did exactly what I wanted it to do. It grinds very well against the other kind of farming decks. So my top four pod in seat order was Timna Dargo, myself on Kefka. Seat three was the Wandering Minstrel, and then seat four was Ratadrabic. Um, Wandering Minstrel is more of a turbo Nas breach pile. Gets to do some interesting stuff with shifting woodlands and just some land action. And then the Ratadrabic is more of a combo deck. It can kind of win out of nowhere just because of the nature of the combo pieces. Um, at one point, the Ratadrabic player actually ended up with double Ranger Captain on board, which was really rough for myself being in Grixis as well as the Wandering Minstrel being on both Breach and I believe on Breach. We did see the Adnaz, but assumably being on Breach, so the lines are also kind of difficult to assemble. Um, the game was pretty grindy. I managed to land an early Notion Thief down. I generally just main phase, dropped the Notion Thief on the table, played a LED into a double Esper Sentinel to see two more cards. I believe it was the only cards I did draw off of the Notion Thief. Um,
Mhm.
but it did keep both the Ratadrabic and the Temna Dargo that were on the Esper Sentinels off of seeing more cards. Um, and then was just kind of able to grind out value on top of those players. And especially because the Temna Dargo was not able to abuse the Temna to just start drawing more cards than I was
Yeah.
capable of. And that is one thing that I do like about Kefka. We're talking about Blue Farm in the meta, and Blue Farm, really the farm decks in general, are not something that I really fear on Kefka. I feel like Kefka keeps up in card advantage just as well, especially because it's just feeding off of them drawing more cards, having more to discard and feed to the Kefka,
Hmm.
while also just keeping those players off of cards. And then the way that I play the deck is pretty heavy on control as well.
Yep.
So not only are the Kefka triggers stripping card advantage, but then just being able to answer what few cards do get through, just makes a world of difference in those matchups.
Again, congrats on getting the top four. Now let's take a look at the list and kind of the cards and stuff that you found that were strong and things that were not so much, and tell us about the list and how you came major what caused you to make those deck choices.
Okay.
Um,
You want to start with reading the commander?
but before we get into that, let me read the commander because that's important. Kefka Court Mage is a 2 mana black, a blue, a black, and a red. Whenever Kefka enters or attacks, each opponent discards a card. Then you draw a card equal to the card type among cards discarded this way. And then, of course, it has this absurdly expensive transform ability, which is 8 mana. Each opponent sacrifices a permanent of their choice. Transform Kefka. Activate only as a sorcery. And then you have this big monstrosity, which is flying, or it's Kefka, ruler of ruin. Flying. Whenever an opponent loses life during your turn, you draw that many cards. Which is it safe to say that this never came up this past weekend?
No, I never flipped it. It is far too expensive, and the ability itself isn't great. The deck doesn't really lean itself into it. The one caveat that I will add to that, there are some decks that are on clones. My original version of this deck was on several clones,
Hmm.
and if you have a clone and a infinite mana loop, you can activate the clone's ability to force your opponents to sacrifice a permanent. However, because the clone is an actual card and has an actual magic backing to the card, you cannot flip the clone, which means that you can keep activating Kefka's ability and force your opponents to sacrifice all of their permanents.
So, so you just it's 8 mana farewell everything.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, let's get into this Final Fantasy Menace here. Tell us about the list and how it got you to your top four finish.
The list is super grindy. It controls the table pretty well, and then it wins with your traditional Grixis lines, your Thoracle, Tainted Pacts. Notably, I'm not on Demonic Consultation. Number one hater of that card. And then also your Underworld Breach lines.
Hmm.
It can also assemble lines with Mnemonic Betrayal, especially because of the amount of cards that it is forcing your opponents to discard between the Kefka triggers, the double wheels, and then even just the nature of it being a pretty heavy control deck tends to fill your opponent's graveyards up pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think we had been talking about in the Discord. I've been like really wanting to build this list. I just have not sat down long enough to pull out sleeves and gather all the cards up and put it together. Um, because I find it very interesting as far as being able to take resources from your opponents. Because I am a Jund player through and through, and I played Scam. I know everybody hates Scam, but it was fun double griefing people. Um, Now I see some creatures here that are a little interesting. Tiny Bones. I think we before we were got recording, we were talking about Tiny Bones, and how it was kind of a great interaction with mnemonic betrayal. Would you like to elaborate and what's kind of been your opinion of Tiny Bones?
Yeah. So unfortunately, it didn't really come up this weekend. One of the unique synergies between Tiny Bones and Mnemonic Betrayal is that because the cards that you cast off of Tiny Bones go back into your opponent's graveyard, you can then Mnemonic Betrayal to cast those spells again. So in some situations, you can hit, Lotus Petals and Rituals, Tutors. You can cast those, grab cards that you need, or just ramp mana, cast a Mnemonic Betrayal, and then because those cards are now in your opponent's graveyards, they will get exiled again, and then allow you to recast them and kind of chain and some semblance of like a storm deck.
Got it. Um, Also, I noticed here you have Displacer Kitten. How does that like? Is there I know I noticed there's no Hole Breaker or Eternal Witnesses here that you can do lightning bolt a million times or what? How are you how are you utilizing the displacer kitten's ability here?
So Displacer Kitten does one of two things. One, it helps with the breach lines. It allows you to reset your mana rocks, or even on your storm turns without breach, just being able to reset mana. But the big draw here is that it also flickers Kefka. So being able to flicker Kefka, see more cards, remove more cards from your opponent's hands. On even on turn rotations where it's just drawing a couple extra cards or removing cards from your opponent's hands, it can be pretty big in that respect.
Hmm. Um, Now, moving on here, like uh, what are some of the cards? Like, I think you said you had mentioned that you were about 50-50 on Tiny Bones, whether to keep it in the list or not. What are some things that you think the deck is lacking, and what's something that you think that you really didn't need this weekend? I know. What were kind of your opinions of those type things?
So Stormkill and Artist is a card that I think played very well in kind of the gold fishing, uh, the kind of fantasy land magic where it's like, cool, there's a turn where I'm storming off. You have a couple storm cards in Flush of Storm and Brain Freeze, where if you get those storm count high enough, you start to just generate a lot of treasures and a lot of mana off of the Storm Killing Artist. I don't think I cast the card a single game this weekend. It is in a rather awkward place being a 4 drop, especially because this deck aims to try to get Kefka out as quickly as possible. So
Yeah,
usually trying to resolve Kefka turn 2, turn 3, so that I can start to gain some advantage. The Stormkiln Artist, the or not just the Stormkiln Artist, but the 4 drop slot in general, um, is wanting to curve well into Kefka or being extremely relevant once Kefka is on board.
yeah,
And the Stormkiln Artist, I don't think really, obviously didn't play it this weekend. I don't think that I really missed it at any point. I don't think that it would have changed any. I like looking at the 2 games that I lost, right? I don't think it would have really changed either one of those games. I don't think that it would have sealed either the game or any of the games that I won any faster. So I think that's a card that I'm looking at coming out. I think talking about the tiny bones and kind of being 50-50 on that is the same with the meme bet and how that
yep,
becomes such a meta call. And I think that I do like meme bet specifically because my commander just strips cards from my opponent's hands. There's
yeah,
bound to be something useful, but I don't want to end up in a situation where I'm playing in a bunch of like my finals pod, right? It's 3 Simic decks. Um, and I don't want to end up in a situation where I am seeing a bunch of cards that aren't necessarily useful to me being discarded to either Tiny Bones or in graveyard for meme bet and seeing those cards and just not being able to do anything with them.
yeah,
Um, I think the other tricky thing about card evaluation in Kefka is that because Kefka allows me to discard my own cards to replace them, you also end up in this situation where there are plenty of cards that may not be right for that game or that situation that are just discard fodder and allow me to just replace it with another card. But I do want to kind of shy away from that world of at best, this card is just discard, draw another card with Kefka on board. So Stormkill Artist is definitely one that I'm looking at coming out. And I think Bergie kind of takes that spot. I think that spot kind of flexed between Bergie, Vivi, and Stormkill Artist. Um, I still want to test out Vivi. The main reason I'm not right now is because the deck is on Curse Totem. And with the meta being so heavy in green right now, and with Vivi, that I think the Curse Totem is just too good at stopping those decks. And I don't necessarily want to impede my own game plan by having a Vivi that can't even activate if I'm rushing out a Curse Totem.
yeah. That would I think that's kind of the going back to why I don't play it in Blue Farm because I don't want to turn off my Ranger Captain when I need it,
Mm.
um, or turn off actually a more relevant card being Facebreaker.
Yeah. And I am
Um,
on the Facebreaker here. I'm a lot less worried about turning off the Facebreaker. And I think going back to the Storm Killing Artist, I think that putting in Facebreaker was a reason why I went back on testing the Storm Killing Artist. Was because of the potential of getting a bunch of treasures that I can start pitching to the Facebreaker to start seeing more cards. And that interaction just never came up this weekend.
Now, I think this is a I I I I don't know if I can hear the the cringe here, but what if you put in Stormkiln, you put Knuckles in place of Stormkiln?
Um, what
Then
does Knuckles do again? Is it
Knuckles is the professional face breaker with double strike and double strike. Let me pull him up here. Let me get him here. I'm not even going to worry about putting him up on the screen. I'm just going to read the card here. Um, Knuckles is double strike, trample, haste. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure. So Knuckles would swing and make two treasures if he's swinging into an open board or somebody that didn't block. And then he has the treasure hunter ability that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 30 or more artifacts, you win the game. Um,
honestly
and he's
if
he's four CMC, so he's two and double red.
I think the problem with Knuckles is that it fights the same slot that Grim Hireling and Rev are in. And I
Yes.
think with the style of deck, we had but prior to me bringing it to this event, my play group and I were toying with ideas, and Rev did come up with the ability to strip additional cards from your opponents,
Yep.
versus the additional treasure that Grim Hireling offers. And I think there's this kind of point of contention with all four of those cards to include Professional Basebreaker that I don't need so many copies of that effect.
Yep.
The Facebreaker I like because of the way that it curves into Kefka.
Mhm.
And especially if I'm able to, it's easier to ramp into the 3 to go to 5 in the next turn, on like turn 2, than it is trying to ramp into 4 into 5 in that next turn. Because
Yeah.
typically the only way I'm doing that is like a Dark Writ or a Mana Vault, which are both temporary mana, which does
Mhm.
not allow me to use that to also cast Kefka, because that is one thing in playtesting. Um, did not come up this weekend. I think that, in my opinion, I did pretty well with mulligans, um, to make sure that I had relatively playable hands. But one thing that did come up a lot in playtesting prior was being dependent on temporary mana to get Kefka out. If something happened to Kefka or I was not able to generate any sort of card advantage off of it coming on board, um, I would struggle to get back into the game. A prime example, if it's turn one land, turn two land, pedal, dark ritual, I've effectively got two permanent mana on board. And if I don't have anything to follow up on that, and the cards I see off of Kefka don't get me there, or if my opponents counter Kefka or remove him before I get the next attack, then I'm just effectively praying that I hit some sort of draw engine to catch back up. Because then if Kefka's answered right now, it costs 7 mana to put back out.
Yep.
And that can be a bit of a struggle.
That was my next question about Kefka. I mean, I mean, everybody knows that I can TNT, I can Thassa's Oracle, Tainted Pact here because like you said earlier, you do not have demonic consultation. And also you can just straight up breach line and don't have like a grinding station here. So you would just brain freeze, Lion's Eye Diamond, and breach. Um, but how detrimental is not having Kefka on the like if Kefka gets killed, like you said, and it becomes a 7 spell and you've used all your temporary mana. I mean, how hard is it to still win without Kefka being on the board?
Um, it really just depends on what stage of the game that we're in. Mid game isn't super difficult. I typically hit enough mana to kind of get Kefka back into the game. Um, it did not. I don't think over the weekend that Kefka was removed or countered. I want to say that Kefka, when I resolved him, stuck every single game. So there wasn't a point where I was forced to kind of have to recast it. And I think that if there ever was a game that he was removed, past those first two games, I want to say that I was set up at that point to be able to just go for the win in that next turn cycle.
And
Um, in playtesting before the event, there were a lot of games where Kefka was removed or countered, and I was able to just recast him in the next turn cycle.
gotcha. Um, and then also the not being able to cast him, like if somebody puts a Dranith down, um, I notice you. Yeah, I mean, I notice you don't have much of a lightning bolt or you have a dismember here,
So that
or a
actually
deadly rock.
came The Dismember actually came up in my game four. There was a Selesnya player that did play a Draenith Magistrate, and I sat on a fish for 4 turns before I finally just dismembered the Draenith and was able to play Kefka.
Wow.
Um, and there was a question that you asked earlier before we had started recording about
Yep.
people's perception of Kefka and how that played into my games,
Yep.
and whether it was kind of a under or overestimation of the deck. And I think that uh, while building this deck, I did think that it is one of those that people will underestimate because it is a 5-drop Grixis commander, right? Like we look at Crom as an example, where people are not worried about Crom hitting the board. We're not throwing all our resources at dealing with it. If it does hit the board, it's not, the end of the world. Yes, it is going to see some cards, but it is not a cool. Crom is on board. We need to 3v1 this player.
Yeah.
Um, and I expected a lot of kind of the same correlation with Kefka because of the mana value. And I think I got the exact opposite effect, which was a little frustrating. And I did have to talk my way around, I want to say, all of the games that I did win, which is that when Kefka did hit the board, the first thing that always happens is the other 3 players immediately begin to coordinate on what cards they're discarding to avoid triggering or avoid giving me more
Giving
cards.
you they're trying to give you the at least you if you just get one card, they all discard a land. Okay, great. Um,
Now, part of the problem with that is a couple things happen, right? So the first thing that happens when players start to talk with each other and talk about what they are and are not able to discard is that they immediately begin to telegraph what their game plan is. When you're playing across certain decks and they say, okay, well, I cannot discard a creature, I cannot discard an instant, I cannot discard an artifact. They start to tell you what's in their hand and what they're able to play around that next turn.
so
Um, Go ahead.
so you're essentially with Kefka. As soon as Kefka hits the board, ETB trigger on the stack, you essentially have just cast a kind of a pseudo Git probe, which
Yep.
is kind of a little scary.
Yes, and part of that problem is that that doesn't always necessarily work or play out well for myself, especially because I am playing a 5-drop commander, usually tapping out to do so. I do play a lot of free interaction. One of my favorite things about this deck is I do get to play Commandeer, because I am in 3 colors and I do get to play a lot of blue cards.
Oh,
But there we run into this situation where it's I am basically shields down when Kefka hits the board, and then the players start talking about what they're capable of doing, and if they're not careful, which a lot of people are just not good about, they will essentially tell their opponents what they can and cannot get away with. So while yes, I might be gaining some information off of what they're sharing with each other and trying to discard,
next
what
player in
they're
turn order is getting
yeah,
that too.
so and it's a really frustrating thing to get people to understand, right? Because obviously we don't want to just let somebody draw cards, but at the same time, I think people tend to forget that this game only has one winner. And
Yeah.
sure, you may coordinate with your opponents, but they're not looking out for your best interests.
Oh, oh,
Uh,
I mean, I never, as a blue farm player, have ever gaslit somebody into saying, "Hey, I am not the threat here." Any player that's played CEDH has definitely been putting that. I'm not the threat here.
Well, and that's the funny
Um,
thing about that is the flip side of that conversation is that I have never once positioned it that I am not in a good position.
Yeah.
I have had a game, so I think it was my game 4 where this happened, where I am attempting to draw cards with Kefka's trigger, and the table is coordinating, and it immediately becomes this conversation of we need to stop Kefka from drawing more cards. Kefka is the threat. And I flat out told the table, I said, don't get me wrong, I am in a good position where we're at right now. No, I'm sorry. I think this was actually my top 16 game, is what it was. And I was like, I know that I'm in a good position. I said, but we need to actually stop and evaluate the board state. And where this came up was the um God, what was it? Oh, the Wandering Minstrel player had uh attempted to cast a intuition in response to my Kefka trigger. Because the player only had one other card in hand.
Oh.
So it was intuition and one other card. And I had tiny bones on the board at that point. And the player wanted to cast the intuition to find another card to be able to discard to Kefka to avoid giving me more value. What ended up happening is the player went and found, because he was pretty far out of the game at this point, the player did go and find essentially two combo pieces. It was Life from the Loam and Shifting Woodlands, and then a Gemstone Caverns to discard to the Kefka trigger. And the ask, of course, was to the other players was to give the player the Gemstone Caverns, putting the other two pieces in the graveyard so that he could pitch the gemstone to Kefka to be exiled to the Tiny Bones. Um, and I had to point out the fact that the Seat One Mardu player, right, already has Dargo, an aristocrat piece, and a mana generator. Legitimately, the only thing the player is missing at this point is any sack outlet to win the game. Because at this
Hmm.
point, does not even need Goblin Bombardment because of the aristocrat piece that is on board. The Ratadrabic player was pretty far behind. I think only had one or two cards in hand at that point in the game, um, and also was not in a position to push, but did have double Ranger Captain on board, which either stops myself or the Wandering Minstrel, or just protects his lines on his turn if he were to go for it. Uh,
Yeah.
and I
And just
essentially
to
had. Go ahead.
Oh, and just to and add there, so that if the from what I was hearing, the Ranger captains would not have affected the Timna Dargo player from that would have I don't think that would have stopped him at all. If, like,
The because and that was actually one of the points. Like the tricky part about the Ranger Captain is the only thing that it would have stopped if it was a non-creature sack outlet, and that was only if it was or if it was cracked before the player drew or went to cast the spell.
yeah,
Once the spell was on the stack, if we didn't have the piece of interaction for it or to remove something off the board,
you're dead.
then we could not. Then the Ranger Captain didn't help there.
Yeah.
And so to keep it short, essentially, I had to explain to the table. It's like, yes, I am in a good position here. Yes, I understand wanting to deny me cards, but I also had to tell them, said we need to look at the board state and understand that this is not a 3v1. I was like, there's other people that are positioned to win. There's a player that is positioned to stop anybody else from winning. So like, and that is something that happens very often with this deck, is that it becomes this mini game anytime a trigger goes on the stack, which is we have to stop Kefka from doing anything. Um, and it's very interesting how it's played around versus other draw engines, right? Because there is not this amount of teamwork, if you want to call it, around the Timna Crom that's on board and swinging in and trying to prevent that from happening, or the Ristic study, or the fish that people are notorious for just playing into. There's not anywhere close to this amount of teamwork to stop
Yeah.
those things from happening. But specifically with Kefka, it is every single game that happens, regardless of what the board state is.
Now, that just kind of made me think of something that's kind of similar to the steel enchantment versus a mirror maid conversation. Everybody says, well, I'm going to cast this steel enchantment and I'm going to take the Ristic study away from you. Kefka has a similar kind of feel to it. I'm going to take cards out of your hand and I'm going to draw cards. So you lose and I get value. Um, and then like a Timnon and Crom are more like a yeah, it's a pain in the ass. You have now a copy enchantment or a mirror maid copying my Ristic study, but I still get my Ristic study. Um, I can definitely see that because I mean Kefka, anybody, I mean they sit down at the table and they don't like being just denied resources while someone else is gaining a up to three cards here.
Yeah, and
Um,
that piece is understandable if the player is actually attempting to answer the Kefka. I think the
yeah,
tricky part with it and what happens a lot is usually there is another player who is in a better position or on the same level as me drawing those cards, and two other players that are not. And the players that are behind will immediately begin to cooperate with the other person that is ahead to try to deny the Kefka cards. And I'm like, you do realize that you are coordinating with somebody who is already further ahead of you. So you're going to work with that person to basically remove more resources from yourself that they're basically going to try to work to their advantage, and then they're still ahead of you. And it's just it's a very weird thing to deal with at a table, and I am wondering if as Kefka sees more play, that people will kind of adjust to that and kind of go back to they need to figure their game plan out instead of trying to work with and coordinate with other players. Or if it is just something that we'll continue to see as long as this deck is in the
and
meta.
and I think that's just something like you were saying, something you were hating about the CDH community, or I guess the format itself. Is there? I think there's a lot of that happens in the format where saying, hey, player A is scary, player B is very close behind. Player C and D team up with player A to stop player B, or vice versa. And it ends up with, oh, I just gave the person that was I was helping a significant value because I mean, how many times have you said, I'm gonna go for an intuition here to stop this? Um, Go gets a counter spell and breach and Savine's reclamation.
Yeah, right.
Uh, wait a minute.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think that one of the things that players need to remember is that at the end of the day, every player has their own best interest in mind. And I think that as long as people continue to believe that another player's out is to stop the current player rather than just winning, that it's just going to continue to happen.
on a kind of a scale of 1 to 10, how good does this deck mull? Is it? I mean, I think like decks like Rock Thrash and those type decks, they mull pretty well. How well does this something or something like this mull?
I think it mulls the way typical like Grixis and the Blue Farm decks do.
Okay.
You're looking for, um, in my opinion, you're looking for mana accelerant to try to get Kefka out as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Um, I usually aim to get him out on turn three. The only time that I pass up on a hand, or sorry, the only time I will not pass up on a hand, if it does not do that, is if it's jamming Ristic Study fairly early.
So
Um,
doing maybe a turn two,
yeah,
like a turn two Thassa's Oracle or turn two Ristic Study. Just I'm gonna get the value engine or the immediate. I have the nuts. I have the breach and something else here that the breach, the lion's eye, and the I'm pushing. But
Yeah. Outside of that, like I'm typically just trying to get the aim is just to get the Kefka out. One hand that I do really enjoy keeping is the Commandeer hands. Um,
Yeah.
just banking on because right, Commandeer, I can take a Mana Rock, I can take a Vault, I can take a Soul Ring, I can take the Rhystic Study, I can take the Smothering Tech. Like there are so many things that I can take with the Commandeer that are just so good that can accelerate my game plan. And in a lot of situations, like I've even had hands where it's like I can Commandeer and still have interaction to back up the Commandeer if I absolutely have to.
Which is
Which is huge.
Yeah, I will say, which is wild, because there's nothing that feels better than commandeering a Ristic study on turn one when you're sitting down in third or fourth seat.
Yep.
Um, I will say this list, you know what it really reminds me of is it reminds me of like Wrong Side. I mean, less on the copying of all the mana, but it kind of is that this deck should be a deck that runs at 1,000,000 miles a minute. It's supposed to be the turbo deck because you're seeing Grixis and the turbo blue farms in your Rog size kind of make you think, oh, this has got to be an Adnaz deck or a Necropotence deck, which that is. I was while you were talking, I was looking at. There's no Necropotence. There's of course no Ad Nauseam because of things like Commandeer would really really suck. Um, but it's not, I mean, like you're saying earlier, it's a mid-range control type deck that just seeks to drag out, I mean, and stop me if I'm wrong, seeks to drag the game out, take away resources, and then push for a win.
Oh, 100%.
Uh,
I do like the mid-range play a lot better.
yep.
Because one of the other things with Kefka and the trigger is that beyond your opponent's coordinating on what to discard, one of the things that always happens is your opponents will discard, in most cases, interaction before they will discard advantage pieces or win cons,
Yeah.
which can play into my favor because of how heavy this deck is on control. Especially if there's like one player that's positioned to maybe try to go for it, I can stop them, and the other players are still trying to play catch up because they're also discarding cards.
Now, and I would like to ask the reverse of what you just said of being able to take interaction out of the player's hands and then be able to, hey, I just need a swan song to stop player A because now he got rid of his silence or whatever before he went to go Thassa's Oracle on his turn.
Mhm.
Um, did you run into the issue of like taking that interaction and oh shit, now I just crippled the board because now player next in turn order has got everything he needs to fight off, or I didn't get any interaction. Um,
No, so over this weekend, the two games that I did lose, the first one I was completely out of that game. After there was a turn one Dothy or there was a turn two Dothy Voidwalker that came down, and I can't really play Kefka into that because I do not want to discard my cards into exile. And then the double smothering type came down, so I don't believe I resolved. I think I resolved Kefka once that game. Um, a single Kefka trigger,
mhm.
and it did not matter because of how far the other players were ahead.
Yeah,
What I ended up like having them discard. Um, and then game two that I lost was a pretty grindy game, and I think um, outside of the oversight of the win attempts at the end of the game, which honest mistake, it happened. The player and I talked about it after the game, and we cleared it up. But it was one of those things where I think everybody played to the best of their ability. And I don't think that anybody really discarded anything that just kind of gave the next player the game.
yeah,
Um, I have seen that happen, not necessarily that people have discarded interaction, but it has happened where like my game plan is to play Kefka, and I'm sorry if players two and four have three cards in hand and player three has seven cards. That
Yeah.
does not change my game plan. And it will happen sometimes where those other players just end up having to discard the interaction and don't have anything to deal with that the player that's further ahead, and I don't have anything to deal with them. But the reality is like that is how I generate value is by both denying my opponent's cards and refilling my own hand with it. And it is the reality that that is going to happen.
You brought up something earlier about how bad this plays into Dothy, and remind me of this rules question. If um Kefka, let's say there's a Dothy on the board or a rest in peace or something that makes graveyards ley line of the void. Let's call it ley line of the void or Dothy. Um, Kefka goes to swing or Kefka ETBs. Does Kefka still draw the cards? Um,
Yes. So discard is a weird interaction. I'll have to have a judge kind of clarify specifically on how what rulings make this work. But what I understand is that discard is a specific action of just the card going from your hand essentially towards the graveyard. A replacement effect changing where that card lands, from what I understand, does not change the act of discarding. So it's
okay,
not like a dying trigger, right? Where death trigger specifically states that it has to go from the
go to the
battlefield to
graveyard.
the graveyard. For some reason, what I understand is that discard does get around that. It does not matter that the card goes to the graveyard, but that the card went from your hand and would have ended up in the graveyard. And if there's a
Gotcha.
judge that is watching this and knows otherwise, please feel free to yell at me.
Yes, please put it in the comment because I am genuinely curious about that because I've had, I've sat down at tournaments and I've had people fight for both sides of saying, hey, well, discarding into a Dothy, that's not discarding. That's the card never hits the graveyard. It has to hit the graveyard for it to be discarded, or vice versa. I am discarding. It's just it's not going to the right place that it should go. Um, Now we've talked about the list, this control list, stuff like that. What are some things that you're thinking about? What are some cards that are on your radar to maybe try out in this list of Kefka? And what, why are you looking at those cards?
So if you go down to my considering on the deck list, like I have upwards, I think close to 60 cards,
It
almost
says
70 cards.
66 right now. Uh-oh, you're
Couple
cheating here.
duplicates.
You got one too many cards here. Um, okay.
So some of this is stuff that has been in and out of the deck list from playtesting. Originally, when I put the deck list together, it was super heavy on a lot of the cloning. So I mean, even went as far as the Deceptive Frostkite. It is a clone from Tarkir that only clones a creature with power 4 or greater. Um,
So it has
and
that ferocity.
yeah. Not a great clone, right? But it does clone Kefka, which was huge. And the idea was to actually run this kind of like a scam deck, where you clone Kefka. I'll cast a scam card on Kefka, clone it. The clone enters the battlefield. I get my trigger, and then Kefka will re-enter the battlefield, and then I'll get a trigger. The problem is like those cards themselves aren't super great outside of those situations, and so they just ended up not making the cut. I came off of Phantasmal Image and Metamorph. They were the last two clones that were in the deck before I brought it this weekend.
Okay.
And because they just did not feel great, there just were a lot of situations where I really wanted to spend the mana to clone Kefka, even for that extra trigger. Um, the Diabolic Intent is something I debate on. I'm pretty slim on the creature package,
Yeah, that's what I was
but
gonna say is
having the extra tutor is relevant. Uh, so that might go back into the list. Um,
so that's
what
also
else?
like you were saying like short on the creatures. Let's see. We have three less like let's I'm using a blue farm for example. Um I have 16 creatures in my deck and I still struggle sometimes and this is also implying that I'm not counting Timna, Crom, or Kefka here, but I find it difficult sometimes to get that diabolic intent cast it when I don't when I'm struggling to see a creature. Um, so yeah, I definitely get that. See some other things that you're considering. I see you're like kind of on the dual caster mage, potentially using that as a secondary win condition.
Yeah, so Dualcaster turned into like a third win con in the deck. I'm also a sucker for any deck that lets me run Displacer Kitten and Dualcaster Mage. One of the first CDH tournaments I went to, I actually got into my top four game off of a really crazy line with Displacer Kitten and Dualcaster. I had a player cast a Chord of Calling. I flashed in a Dualcaster in response to this. Dualcaster copied it, grabbing Displacer Kitten. Displacer Kitten allowed me to cast another non-creature I had in my hand to flicker the Dualcaster, copying the Chord again, grabbing another card, and was just able to chain so many spells on top of the stack on this single Chord of Calling. And by the time my other opponent kind of figured out what was going on, it was a little too late to really interact with it. And I was able to win on top of my opponent going into their next turn, winning there. So I really have a soft spot for the dualcaster displacer thing there. The problem is that because of the way that Kefka also cycles through cards, I kind of don't want to see a lot of A plus B combos in a deck because they tend to gunk up your hand and do what I now refer to as reducing your hand size. If you're forcing yourself to hold on to these cards until you see the other piece. So Dualcaster kind of just went to the maybe pile for a bit for this weekend. Um, FOMO and Generator Servant were other creatures in kind of the two drop spots that also kind of helped with the Kefka plan. Generator Servant itself gives Kefka haste. FOMO allows is another discard outlet. And it once I have Delirium allows me to have an extra combat, so it's an extra
Hmm.
Kefka trigger. The problem is that it just runs into a situation of there's too many times where it is offline and just doesn't do anything. It also, if I remember correctly, does not have haste, doesn't gain haste. So then you also run into a situation of FOMO just not really doing anything for a turn cycle after it hits the board. Um, FOMO was in the list when I was on Rionia because Rionia and FOMO are a two card combo by allowing you to essentially take infinite combats. I think as long as you have cast a single uh, instant or sorcery that turn to up Rionia's copy count.
Gotcha.
Um, but Rionia kind of fell in the same boat of here's a 5-drop creature that I'm playing behind my 5-drop commander to do
Yeah.
something, and that doesn't feel super great.
Yeah,
Um,
I can definitely see it where Kefka just kind of takes over that five CMC spot when you're not like in something, say like a Gaia's Cradle deck, or you're not in green, where 5 mana in Grixis, that's a lot of mana.
Hoarding Broodlord's another card that I looked at prior to this weekend. Hullbreaker Horror was in the first iteration of me actually playing the deck, and it ran into the problem of it required too many pieces to really get there, and then
Yeah.
I basically only put it on board if I was reanimating it. And I don't want to go heavy on the reanimate spells since I'm not on the whole clone package. And then Hoarding Broodlord is a card that I do go back and forth about. It and Saw in Half are two cards that I
That's
really enjoy
iconic.
playing.
Yeah.
Um, but the problem is that they're also not like super great cards, and Hoarding is another card that I basically have to reanimate to do anything with. And I don't think that I ever felt like I was in a position that I needed other cards to really close the game out. Um, so I think that like in a world of changes that I make to the deck, there are definitely cards that I know that I want to take out of the deck. There are a couple cards that I am iffy on taking out of the deck. I
Mhm.
don't know really what goes in other than maybe looking at more control pieces. Probably another piece of like creature removal would be relevant. That is commander agnostic.
Yeah.
Uh, because I think even if it's just going on like a Pongify or a rapid hybridization, to be able to remove some problem creatures before I get Kefka out.
Yeah, like wouldn't actually here I know you had the sink in the stupor here, which I mean that doubles as an MDFC. What about something like like Snap, being able to uh I know you're untapping the 2 mana. Let's say you untap um I mean you have your Ancient Tomb there, your Cavern of Souls. I mean with
I
you'd
go
have to have a bit of mana to at least 3 mana on top of the 2 mana that you're using for the snap.
So I particularly like Sync because it is an MDFC. I also like Sync in a world where Cavern and Mistrise Village, Veil of Summer, what's the other one? Allosaur Shepherd, where these cards are starting to see a lot more play. I like the
Yeah.
ability to be able to bounce the card back to my opponent's hand. Sync also, if I remember correctly, targets any spell or permanent
Yes,
uh,
it's
which
any spell.
which means I can also bounce. Oh no, it is opponent control. Sorry,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, not your
I not
it's
mine.
yeah.
So, but yeah, so that doesn't really work for the other piece, but it does just allow me to get around kind of the uncounterable, and is just another
Give,
piece for removal.
gives you kind of a pseudo another mind break trap. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Um now let's talk about kind of how this do you think this list is a little bit of a flash in the pan or I mean I mean you're an excellent player and is it more of you drug this deck to kind of the top four, or is it a little bit of both that the deck actually just caught a lot of people off guard? Um,
So I
and
don't. There's a couple of factors here, right? I don't think that the deck, based on the conversations that I had to have at the table, in all the games that I won, I don't think that the deck caught anybody off guard. If anything, I feel like, and this is obviously funny to say as a guy who won the games, but I do think that there were a lot of situations where people were overly cautious about Kefka, and in particular me drawing cards when other people were in just as good a position as I was. So I don't think that people necessarily underestimated the deck. If anything, I think that people did take the deck serious. People also, not to toot my own horn, but people know me in the tournament scene, so they see me at a table and they know that like I'm not here goofing around. So I don't think that people sat down and saw me playing Kefka and just like, oh, he's just here to have fun this weekend. So I
yeah,
think that people like sat down, saw this deck, they were like, okay, he's on to something. Like we need to be on the lookout. It's also like it is a typical Grixis pile, right? Like it
yeah.
does all the same Grixis things. So it is still a deck that can kind of win out of nowhere doing the same stuff every other Grixis deck does.
Being this deck, I think this will be the last thing we kind of talk about. What are the weaknesses of Kefka, and what are the cards you really don't want to see on the board playing this deck? I know we mentioned Dothy earlier, um, but what are some things that you're really not wanting to see?
So Dothy is definitely something I don't want to see. Mostly because Dothy does not allow me to be pretty frivolous with my discards. I can discard lands to Dothy usually with no problem. Um, I don't really want to discard interaction. I definitely don't want to discard tutors. So it's I have to be mindful about the Dothy being on board so that I'm not just giving them cards that are going to win them the game, or denying myself to be able to play off of breach or whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that I really played against very many turbo decks this weekend. I think the only one that might have been turbo, I'll have to go back and look at the deck list, is the Wandering Minstrel. It is typically a turbo Nas deck, but I don't. We did not get to a point of a Nas. The Nas actually got wheeled out of the player's hand. Yeah, that list is on Hermit Druid. It is 100% a turbo deck.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not. That is the one turbo deck that I did see that did not get to do its thing. But turbo decks, if I don't get either the Ristic or the Fish early to jam against them, or don't see like the right piece of interaction to pinch them, can get underneath me because this deck wants to play mid range.
Gotcha. Um, so I think we kind of touched on everything. We touched on how deck mulligans about as well as anything. Cards you're thinking about maybe trimming or Stormkiln and Tiny Bones occasionally. Um, kind of. I mean, it's a really interesting list, and heck, I'm actually. I think as soon as I get off here, I think I'm gonna print it out and put it together because I mean I love my blue farm, but I do want to try different things because this is a fantastic format, and I feel like trying new things in the format is part of why I like it so much.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, is there anything before we wrap this up that you'd like to add about the deck?
No. I mean, I'm
Or-
gonna probably tweak the deck a bit more. I ugh, might end up playing this at Still City. I mean, it did really well this weekend. I unfortunately am the type of player that will wake up and decide that I want to build a brand new deck literally an hour before a tournament. So we'll see if this deck survives till then.
Now, there's just one last thing that came to mind. Do you recommend this to I mean, like, who would you recommend this to? Like, if you're trying out a new deck, I would feel that. I mean, is this something a new player can try out, or is this something that you would definitely have to have some significant games under your belt to really pick this up?
So I think blue farm players can transition to this list pretty well. It plays kind of the same game plan, right? Which is I'm just looking to draw cards. It has the added effect of making your opponents discard stuff before you get there. I think that the mulligans and your sequencing decisions are a little more important in this deck because of how mana intensive the commander is and
Yep.
needing to be mindful of what you have in the deck to kind of get you there. I cannot tell you the number of games that I have fired off a Tainted Pact just to find the last piece to cast Kefka on the next turn. So it's just like not being afraid to do that. Um, I think that Kefka is a good transition from other mid-rangey Grixis decks. I don't think that it's a terribly awful deck for a player to pick up as a newer player. But definitely familiarize yourself with the list, what mana sources you have available, and kind of what you have to look for. The other thing to keep in mind too is that it is a three-color commander, so you do need to be careful about the pips that you're playing at any point to make sure that you're able to cast your commander. There's nothing worse than keeping a hand that has 5 mana, but all of your colored mana sources are just blue and black because you will
Yeah.
not get your commander out.
Um, well, I think it's safe to say everybody wants to have Jeweled Lotus back so we can have a two mana Kefka. Um, that would I honestly think with if they unban Jeweled Lotus, and I know we've harped on this topic a million times, but I will keep doing it because I want the card back in the format, not because of fast mana, boo boo boo. I want it so it diversifies the format. Um, but anyway, I said my piece there. I think this deck is very interesting. I look forward to playing it, and yeah. Well, as we wrap up, is there any socials or anything that you'd like to plug, Malik?
The only thing I want to add, I do offer coaching and deck building advice. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to reach out to me. I am in the double sleeve channel. I believe my name in there is Malik. If
Yeah.
not, you can find me under Spoopy Lance. Um, but yeah, feel free to reach out.
Is there other than Discord, which I mean, glad they would come into my Discord or the double sleeve to find you. Where else can they find you just out in the wild? As
Right now, Discord is probably going to be the easiest way to get in touch with
okay,
me. I am still in the process of kind of setting up some more stuff around the coaching to make it more accessible. But Discord will be the easiest way to get in touch with me right now.
Excellent. Well, anyway, guys, I do want to remind you again that we, the Double Sleeve team, and Malik as well, will be at the Steel City Spectacular uh, coming up in it's less than a couple weeks. It's on the
Yeah.
from the the 16th to the 19th, or no, excuse me, 17th. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's three
Uh,
weeks we fly out.
yeah, it's ready to go. But anyway, guys, we'll if you want to come say hey, we'll be there. We'll have our own table, and also don't forget about our Etsy shop if you would like to get any of our playmats or any of that type of thing. And make sure to check out Bonfire Store for t-shirts just like this one. And yeah, uh, hope y'all enjoyed the deck tech. Let us know in the comments if you'd like to see us do more things like this, and if there's a commander that you'd like us to show on the channel. But anyway, guys, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.